We're here with Gloria Lum, cellist, veteran cellist with the LA Philharmonic, plus many other things, including founder of Audition Confidential, pretty new project for you, right?
That's correct.
You're a few years old, but you also teach too, right?
I do teach. I teach at Occidental College, but I teach a lot
Uh,
online.
yeah, okay. So like most musicians, doing a lot of different things. Full-time job at the LA Philharmonic, I'm sure, plus all the other things. How did you get into music? How did you get into, playing the cello? Where did that all start?
Well, I grew up in
Mm.
Berkeley, and Berkeley
Yeah,
Unified School District has a very rich string program since, I don't know, starting in elementary school. So I'd actually started playing piano on my own starting at the age of 4. And it was really great that I was in Berkeley and I chose the
Mhm.
cello. And so I played it all the way through elementary and high school. One of the things that was most fun was I joined what was called the Oakland Symphony Youth Orchestra, which was a fantastic
Oh yeah.
youth orchestra. And we traveled to Berlin. And so there was a
Wow.
lot of interest in orchestral music from a very early age and certainly through high school. So then I went to UCLA and USC. And after graduating from USC, I really thought my goal was to play in an orchestra, mainly because I
Yeah,
loved the sound and because it was like the most realistic way I thought to make a living and to, be a
right,
professional. So
right.
that's kind of where my interest in orchestral music began. And then along with that, of course, is in order to
Yeah.
get into an orchestra, you have to take a lot of auditions. So my first
Yes.
job was with the Denver Symphony, and
Okay. Yeah.
yeah. So I
Is
played there
that the
for
one? So, I live in Colorado Springs, but there's the
ah
Colorado Symphony, and
Symphony.
then it's just a separate organization that's a Denver, or is it the same one?
No,
Oh,
it's the same one. It's now
okay.
renamed Colorado Symphony after they went through
Okay.
some changes. So yes,
Okay.
that is the same one that is the major orchestra in Denver.
Right. Okay. Cool. So you
Yeah.
were there for how long?
I spent 5 years there. I took many auditions and then I came out to Los Angeles and I won that audition and for the LA Phil back in the mid 80s.
So it's been a journey. I assume when somebody gets into the LA Philharmonic, New York, these are bigger organizations, do people stay, right? They're going to stay a long time. And
It
so,
is, yeah, it's
yeah,
sort of the top of the heap for sure. And I think there are a
yeah,
lot of people who, there are a lot of great orchestras now, but we went through a period, I'd say in the 90s and the aughts, when there was a
yeah,
lot of difficulty for orchestras. So being in a major symphony orchestra is really great job security as much as you
yeah.
can, I think, in the orchestral world. So yes, very few people, once they get this job, leave it unless they have something very different they want to do. They go to another major orchestra, or we retire.
Yeah, exactly. One question I have is, since people are staying so long, and I know some people in the Dallas Symphony because I lived there for years, but
Mhm.
how do they ensure that, you're still practicing and that you're up to the level you need to be? Do people get fired from, these big symphonies?
Well, generally, when you get into an orchestra,
Yeah.
you have a 2-year period, which is your tenure
Okay.
review period. So, yes, of course, usually when you're coming in, you're playing at a very high level just every time. And right now,
Yeah.
the level of players is just so incredibly high. I think to have a long career, yes, you
Mm.
need to keep practicing. And for me, when I look at my career in the past, 30 plus years with the Philharmonic, the job changes. And so you are really forced to change with it. And a lot of it is just your own pride. I don't
Uh,
want my playing to be
yeah.
less than what is at the very top. So yes, we all practice a tremendous amount
Yeah.
to stay on top of our game.
But is it ever, this is my curiosity. Do people fall off? Things happen, life happens.
Sure. I
Yeah.
mean, that
It's
does
just rare
happen.
though.
It's
Yeah.
very rare. And I'd say at this point,
Yeah.
rarely do people get fired for their playing ability. It's just
Okay.
not done because it is the level so high. I mean, you
Yeah.
can get fired for all sorts of other things,
For
but
other, yeah.
that's
Yeah.
just, it doesn't happen very often. So
Yeah.
generally, you get the job, you get tenure, and you're pretty good for the rest of your life if that's what you choose to do.
With this podcast, I have a diverse background of people from different genres of music and different
Mhm.
arts. Maybe tell people a little bit about in the classical space, what is it like for somebody, to graduate from USC or any music program? Um, what is it like for them to audition? Like, just give an overview of what it's like to just get a job, you know? I mean, we know they have auditions, but how do they go about getting a job in the first place? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
When there is an opening in an orchestra like mine or any of the other what we call ICSOM orchestras, there's usually
Yeah.
an ad placed in something called the International Musician, which is the union paper, which is actually worldwide at this point. It's Canada and the United States. And then as if you're interested in the job, you send in a one-page resume. They will look at it. They often send you back what's called an excerpt repertoire list. So what it is they give you very specific like measures and pieces that you need to prepare. So you may play your concerto great, but unless you really know the orchestral excerpts, you know, you're not going to get past the first round. So I think a lot of young players don't realize that learning orchestral excerpts is a very specific skill. And there's a lot to go into learning how to play them correctly, because basically they'll send you your page, one line. But of course, you know, you're only one line in an entire orchestra. So your job is to understand, well, how does my line fit in with everybody else? Where do I need to take time? When am I primary, the primary voice? When am I secondary? So they're all very specific things that they ask. And each excerpt shows a different ability. Maybe it's a different technical ability, a different artistic ability. They're looking for sound, articulation. So, you know, they're very carefully selected, these excerpts. And generally anywhere from, I'd say, 8 to 16 different excerpts that you have to prepare.
Yeah, that's a lot. So you have to be ready for. And what about sight reading? Are they going to include that in audition?
You know, sometimes they will say sight reading is required. I'd say rarely do we ever get to it, because, you know, you rarely sight read in an orchestra because you always have the music available. You always know what it is you need to play next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So you rarely have to sit down and just read it. But certainly that is a skill that people should learn. And I think that comes with practice, like anything else, and being in the job.
You send in, so you said you send in a resume. Is it a traditional resume you would include, the experience, education, that kind of thing, or what would you have on that?
For an orchestral audition, what I suggest my clients do is the first thing you list is your orchestral experience. Do you have any professional experience? So then you list that, you list your education, like where you went to school, the degrees you've had, things like that. Sometimes people would put down maybe festivals that they've attended. So anything that will show that you have orchestral experience, even as a student. You know, I mean, I think there are a lot of orchestras that realize, well, if you're hiring a student, obviously they're not, or somebody who's shortly out of school, either as a bachelor's or a graduate degree, you know, they may not have had time to have like real professional experience. So any sort of like orchestras, smaller orchestras that you may have played with, you know, if you played in the symphony, the university symphony, things like that.
Yeah, it sounds like a CV almost, like you can. You want to include as much as you can. So that you send the resume in, and then they'll decide to send you the excerpt.
Yes, usually what you have to do is get past the resume round and then be invited, and then they will let you see what they're expecting. Sometimes a lot of orchestras will put their list on their website if they have an opening. Sometimes they're a little bit more sort of a little, I don't want to say secretive, but they're just more, they don't necessarily show you what it is early on.
Yeah, they don't want to get a flood of people. Yeah, too many, right?
Well, but we do get a flood of people, you know.
Anyways.
Like, for instance, we just had section violin auditions, and there were probably at least 120 people, you know, who went through the resume round, who were invited. So it nowadays, to have, you know, it's very highly competitive. And out of 120 people, there are probably at least 20 great players who could all have done the job. But then you have to make it your way through the audition.
Are you still in the audition committee, or is that what they call it?
We have an auditions, and renewals committee. I have spent many years on it. I'm not currently on it.
So they literally had 120 people audition for one spot. Right?
Yeah, sometimes.
So
that's true.
They're having to sift through and disseminate how. Find little levels of granularity of difference between these different people. So
that's correct.
So the resume thing is interesting because I mean, it's a gatekeeping thing in certain ways for good reason, probably, just so you don't get I mean, are they expecting a college degree in music, I mean, performance degree, that kind of thing, or are they? What are the things that are like they need to be on there in order to get an audition?
Well, a lot of it has to do with
Yeah.
what position is being advertised. For instance, like a section
Okay.
position, we'll often invite people who are like, they've gotten their degree or whatever, and it's like that's an entry level position in the orchestra, section string
Right.
player.
Right.
But if you were like going for a principal cello or let's say principal oboe, we would definitely need to see somebody who's had, professional experience, principal experience. It changes depending on what the actual chair is that's open. So for instance,
Okay.
if we had like a concertmaster opening, we're not going to probably invite people who are just getting out of college. That's just not going to
No.
happen.
Yeah. Right.
You will have had to have major experience behind you before you even make it to the invited round.
Right.
Yeah,
So you gotta, for people in a program right now in college, they have to understand the path. It might be, do this, but everybody has a teacher, and hopefully their private teacher or somebody is guiding them. So
hopefully.
yeah, I know. My background is in jazz, and I went to college for that, for trombone, and I always felt like I could have used a lot more guidance. And now my son's playing jazz bass, and
Uh-huh.
like I'm trying to guide. I'm like, if I had the amount of guidance that he has from my family, it would be a lot easier. So, getting into your experience auditioning, what was the first uh, orchestral position you auditioned for?
Oh, my first audition was for the
Yeah,
San Francisco Symphony because I'm from the Bay Area. I was
yeah,
still a senior at USC when I did that audition. And I was very smart in that I had studied with Ron Leonard for a semester. And Ron Leonard
okay,
was the principal cellist of the LA Philharmonic at that time. So I decided, well, I should probably go play for him. So thank God I did that. So he went through the list with me, and it was fantastic because it was like, he'd say, okay, the reason why they're asking this excerpt is because they're looking for this and they're waiting for you to do this and don't do this. And so it was like cheating on a
yeah,
test. So that was fantastic. But it was the very first audition I'd ever done. I didn't really know how I needed to prepare. So I went out there, you play your concerto, that went great. Then they asked me this, I think it was Heldenleben, and it's like, oh, I
hmm,
don't think I really worked on this one.
yeah,
So, you don't last very long, and that's how you often learn. So
right,
the thing about orchestral audition prep, especially for someone who's coming right out of school, is it can get very expensive to be flying around the country taking auditions. And yes, you learn like, oh, wow, I should have really spent a lot more time preparing that list, but I didn't realize at the time. So
uh-huh.
this is part of the issue, is that a lot of people will do their first maybe two, three, four auditions, and they're just sort of learning what it is they need to be working on.
Yeah, it's learn on the job kind of thing. But
Yeah,
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 and it's pricey. So getting to these auditions on you it's on your dime to get there.
that's right.
And yeah, you're taking your instrument, you're getting a hotel, all those things. So yeah,
Right.
you're a musician, so it's not like you have a bankroll to supply for this. So
That's right.
yeah, obviously with your new coaching service, the Audition
Mhm.
Confidential, we'll get into that later. I assume, some of the impetus might be helping people know what to get ready for, so they're not wasting money just flying all over the place,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
To step back a little bit, you said that your goal was to be in an orchestra. What are the other like avenues people are going into who are doing these degrees and string degrees? I mean, in LA, obviously, I can think of the studios, though that is kind of decreased, the movie production.
Right.
What other kind of money making opportunities are there for performing cellists?
So I'd say today's young player who
Mm,
graduates with either a bachelor's, a master's, or a doctorate in music for performance often
yeah,
have to kind of cobble together a freelance career, and
yeah,
that could mean playing in like a regional orchestra, doing a lot of teaching, maybe doing gigging, like whether you can get recording, church jobs, all sorts of things like that. And I think one of the most important things for young musicians coming out of school is to realize that you need to cobble together your own career and that nobody else is
yeah, of
in
course.
in
Yeah.
charge of it except for you. I advise a lot of my clients who want to get into the orchestral world, but they're still in that freelance stage, to
Hmm.
reach out to contractors, to principal players in regional orchestras, to make those contacts, play for people, and get on people's lists. So you want to become known to the people who are hiring musicians in your
Yeah.
area, your geographical area. And sometimes you do that by playing auditions. And even if you don't get the job, they'll say, oh, she was really good. She didn't get the job, but I'm going to hire her for other things, or maybe she'll sub. So
Okay.
putting yourself out there as much as you can is incredibly important. And the other thing I would say is the most important thing for a young freelancer, or actually any musician, is to
Uh-huh.
make sure that when you show up, you do so on time, prepared, and have a good attitude, because your
Yep.
reputation is going to get you work. And people are going to hire you again if they like you, you do a
Yeah.
good job, as opposed to somebody who may be a better player but has an attitude, or, is too, difficult to work with.
Yeah.
So, it is a whole skill set that you need to, develop as a musician in order
Yeah.
to get work.
Yeah. It's not, I mean, my son's playing, he's still in high school, but he plays like 4 to 6 gigs a month or something. And it's a learning experience, because one of the important things to learn is you're dealing with artists, I think, and so artists can have all kinds of different temperaments. And
Hmm.
some of them, the people that are reliable, who always come and play their part and are nice to hang with, they tend to rise to the top. Like I can name
Absolutely.
like one or two drummers in Colorado Springs where I live who are the guys that everybody hires. They just come and do the job and then they leave, and you don't have to worry about it. I think we think that that's easy to do, but it's not so easy to do, because sometimes you have to work with people that are a little hard to work with, and you're having to navigate that. And the other thing is, you're there to play the part. You're not there to
Hmm.
just be a star, be a musician. You're there to play the part you're hired to play. So
Right.
yeah, and like you said, the excerpts that they want for these auditions, that's kind of, they're looking for how well you blend in with what's going on, not just how well you play the instrument. So
Exactly right. Yeah,
yeah.
you have to have an incredible amount of like knowledge, flexibility, and then also virtuosity to even be able to play a lot of this stuff. You have to be like, a virtuoso on your instrument these days.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you do.
I mean, the type of people
Yeah.
who win like section positions, they're like winning, like they're like placing in international competitions. It's crazy. It's crazy
So it's
how
gotten better
high.
since
Oh my
you've been in.
God. Oh my God,
Yeah.
yes.
It's
It's kind
yeah.
of, it's a little scary. I mean, it's like, years and years ago, nobody broke the 4-minute mile. Now everybody breaks the
I
four
know.
minute
Yeah.
mile.
Yeah.
So the same thing is true, I think, certainly in the music field, just people's ability, their technical ability is just higher and higher and better and better. And it's like, if you have 10 people who all play at a really high level, then it goes on to another level. But to even be in that last final 10, you have to have absolute control over your instrument in a way that like we never had to 20, 30 years ago, or
Yeah.
even 10 years ago. So
Really.
it's really intense. Yes.
I know I talk about that a lot about, I'm from the jazz space. It's all freelance, right? But the young people in jazz now are just, because you talk about the technical ability and the knowledge of music are so high compared to when I was doing it in the 90s. Because, in the 90s we had, or 80s, 70s, you had to go buy albums, you had to listen to I remember I could go to Borders and listen.
Yes.
I could, they would unwrap the CDs and I could listen to them.
Right.
And in jazz, you have to listen to the music, because that's,
Right.
you transcribe it. And the exposure we had was so limited to what we could afford to buy. But now with the internet, everybody has exposure to everything. And I think it's really influenced people's ability to just grasp knowledge of what's happening. It's easier to learn about auditions and what's happening and know, and then even working with somebody like you,
Mhm.
and just elevate their skill, just even being an audition taker. So there's all
Right.
kinds of things happening in the world that are just contributing to the skill level. So I assume, in the LA Philharmonics, some of the younger musicians might be the best technical musicians there. So what do they struggle with? Let me ask you this. So a young musician comes in,
Uh-huh.
technical, amazing. Like, what do they usually struggle with just being in that context?
Well, I think probably the first thing that have to deal with is the schedule, because we have a very intense schedule. So we're playing different concerts every week. We play, we have 4 rehearsals, 4 concerts, and so
Yeah.
a lot of it is just the sheer amount of music that you have to learn on a weekly basis. So there's that. I think a lot of times too, when you're a new player coming in, especially if you're a section player, it's your job to understand how the orchestra responds to a conductor. Sometimes,
Right.
or some orchestras play really late off the beat. So one of the things you really need to be aware of is how do I fit in? And
Mm.
that is a crucial skill, because you can be a great player, but if you can't play with others, and at the same time with the same, be aware of all the things that you like your principal is doing, then you're not going to fit in. So I think you have to have like all your senses out and be able to know, oh, so and so's doing this. Oh, I need to play with my stand partner, or I need to kind of be listening to the flute there. So there's a tremendous amount of information that's constantly coming at you, on top of
Uh-huh.
just playing your own part. So
Okay.
that's often something, you're learning that earlier on, because you don't get into an orchestra from school without ever having played in an orchestra. So you're already learning some of those
Right.
skills. But I'd say that that's the part that maybe most challenging, is the schedule and really learning how to play with this particular orchestra, and understanding sort of like the culture of the sound, the culture of the approach to the music changes. I mean, you hear Cleveland play something, you hear LA play
Uh-huh.
something miles apart, just in terms of how we come to the music. A lot of it
Okay.
has to do with the music director. So, it's not necessarily, it is a little bit of skill based, but that's like that's taken for granted that you can play anything, but it's just learning how to like spit it out week after week that becomes challenging, I think.
And then when you're in school doing music, it's so much of a lab environment. You're not playing gigs all the time where you're having, like you say, having to learn new repertoire. How many shows a year do you guys play?
No, it's
100,
like 120 concerts a year or something. I mean,
120.
it's huge, and the thing is, it
Wow.
is constantly changing. The thing about the LA Philharmonic is
Yeah.
we're also known for playing a lot of new music. So it's not like we get to play,
Right.
oh, it's Beethoven 5 again, or it's Schumann 3, or it's Mahler 4. It's stuff that we know. It's
Yeah.
brand new stuff that
Yeah.
nobody's played. So it's not like you can go listen to a recording. We're
Yeah.
sitting there looking at these notes and thinking, okay, I have no idea how this goes. So that's where, you learn your part as well as you can. Then you go into rehearsal and then you see, oh, this is what else is going on. This is how I put it together. So those are different skills in terms of just sheer learning notes, which is something else. So it's the
Right.
ability
Yeah.
to put together all these very different requirements that make a
Mhm.
great orchestral player. That takes a while to kind of get into it. So I think, we have such great new players, and I look at them and they're exhausted.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, I'm exhausted too.
So people know, like, and this is something I've just learned because I played trombone, but in strings, you have a stand partner where, I mean, you're looking at the same music, and then you kind
Right.
of have like a wedge where you, right? But
Mhm.
just the logistically, do they tend to match up people, a new player? They just put you in the spot, like you're,
Well, most orchestras these days have what we call
yeah.
a revolving string section, which means every two
Okay.
weeks you're in a different spot, you're with a different person, so that's also challenging too, because sometimes you could be sitting like right up front under the conductor's nose, which is,
Yeah.
kind of hair raising sometimes. Other times you're
Yeah.
in the very back where you can't hear anybody, or you're stuck between a bass player and a first violinist, or right next to the piccolo, which is me this week,
Yeah.
and so there are all these other things that you have to do. So again, flexibility is a big part of it. Depending on where you sit, you have a very different experience.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to think about. As far as other, gigs, freelance work,
Mhm.
do auditions ever come into play in that world? Chamber music, things like that.
A formal audition, probably not. I think
Yeah.
sometimes, like if you wanted to get, and I don't know how this works anymore, but if you wanted to get like into the recording area in LA, you
Yeah.
might go play for somebody, but that's not really a formal audition, but that's just
Right.
like to get on somebody's list and, say, here I am. And, if you need anybody, this is how I play. Chamber music is a different sort of thing. Usually people just get together to play, and like a lot of great quartets and chamber music groups are formed at college,
Okay.
or things like that. And that's a very different sort of working environment than an orchestra. There are,
Yeah.
famous quartets that will say, our cellist is leaving, and they will like audition different cellists. They invite them to come play and they see whether they
Right.
match up and stuff like that. So that's a little bit different.
Right. So there is it's quite a contrast between the very structured world of orchestra auditions
Hmm.
versus being a freelance musician, which is complete is it's void of auditions. It's really a reputation game. You really got to know that when you get in the music and you want to be a performer. So
Yeah.
people who aren't really technically that great at being musicians in certain genres will end up having a great career because they fulfill all the other responsibility like things like they're a great networker, or they're a
Yes.
great person, or maybe
Right.
they're a great at leading something. I don't know. The Audition Confidential, I want to get into that. So
Hmm.
Audition Confidential, and for everybody wondering, it's auditionconfidential.com, right? That's the
Hmm.
website. Right.
Right.
So what was the impetus for starting that? What happened that you're like, I need to start a coaching service, whatever, for auditions? Yeah.
Well, it all started during the pandemic, like everybody else.
Okay. Yes.
And I have a colleague who plays in the orchestra who has done online teaching, and he was running a course for how do you run an online business. And I thought, oh, okay, well, it's June 2020, and I got nothing to do. So I
Yeah.
took his course, and I was thinking, well, if there's anything that I feel very passionate about, it probably would be auditions, orchestral auditions, because I've sat and chaired so many auditions. And just knowing that there are so many, especially young people who come out of school or who are young professionals who really don't have an idea of what it takes to win a major symphony orchestra audition.
Right.
And so I thought this would be a good business for me. It's great online because then you can deal with, you can talk and teach people all over the world, which I've actually
Yeah.
done, which is kind of fun. But also this idea of being very specific and saying, look, these
Mhm.
are the ways you need to think about preparing for an audition. Because, like I said, you can kind of figure it out if you took probably 8 to 10 auditions and you go, oh, yeah, well, there's that thing that I should have practiced a little bit better. Oh, it's like my mind was totally not in it. Or, they said that they needed more artistic expression, or God, I was really tired, or wow, I just did not organize myself very well. So these are like sort of the big buckets of things that I talk about. And, we go through what I call my 5 pillars as to how
Okay.
do you really get yourself all on all cylinders so that when you go out on stage and you're ready to play, that you are completely prepared and everything is like as bulletproof as it possibly can be, so that you feel good, like I can absolutely deliver my best. And so there are
Right.
many different ways you prepare for it. And that's what I go through when I teach my courses.
This is a really unique thing too, because I don't know of anybody else who's doing has started a business specifically coaching for auditions. Are there other people doing this, or is this
There are a
there?
couple other people. One of
Yeah.
them is percussionist in the Met. He's been doing it for quite a
Okay.
long time. There are other people who are wonderful musicians who do teaching online. Nathan Cole is one of them, who's our associate concertmaster, has had a long time online,
Yeah.
and he will often do some audition stuff in addition to his violin teaching. So there are more and more, there are people who understand that being prepared for auditions is a very
Yeah.
specific skill, and that not only do you have to be a great player, there's all this other stuff you need to know. I mean, I'm really pleased that people are being more and more aware of the fact that, yeah, you can't just go in and play a great concerto and say, yes, we want you, because there's a
Yes.
whole other skill set that we're looking for. And you may not know that. So the more prepared, the more knowledge you have about whatever you're about to do, whatever audition you're going to do, the
Mm.
better off you'll be, because there are people who do really prepare well. So you want to be one of those people who has
Yeah.
gone through everything, so you have the best possible chance.
Right. Yeah. Well, it sounds like what you've done is you've taken, maybe there's some other people coaching or doing some things on audition, but you're trying to structure it with these. Well, you had the 3 buckets, 5 pillars. You're trying to structure it into a system that's easy to teach, or it's like refined. I'll say refined, right? It's refined down to something that you can communicate to people, and then they can remember easily. Because I can remember 3 and 5, and remember. because a lot of advice you get, career advice, whatever, is so anecdotal, or it's just, oh, meet with me and I'll talk to you about it,
Right.
which is fine and it's good,
Yeah.
but it's not always refined and thought through in a way that covers all your bases. But what
Hmm.
you're doing, it sounds like, is you're saying, I've had a lot of experience doing this. I'm gonna refine it down to this. And so if you meet with me and we go over this, I can guarantee you're going to have something that is usable and is going to help you. So what's the ideal client for you? Maybe not ideal, but what kind of clients do you look for to work with, your customers? Do they have to be auditioning for a certain thing? Do you have to play a certain instrument? Who is it?
Oh, right now I work just with cellists because we go over very
Okay.
specific excerpts. But,
Mhm.
I'd say anybody, I've worked with people who are still in school, like still working on their bachelor's or their master's, people who have been freelancing for a while and want to, get an orchestra job. There have been some
Okay.
great players who are already in like lesser orchestras and want to make the jump to a major orchestra. So all of those people who are on the audition circuit, we can all use a little bit of brushing up and having somebody else sit there and say, you're doing this and doing that, and let's work on this. So every person comes to me with a slightly different skill set. And
Okay.
it's my job to say, okay, let's sit down, let's take a deep dive into your playing. These are the areas I think you need to improve. Let's talk about your mindset. What are the things you're thinking about? How do we deal with them? So I'd say once you are technically prepared as well as you can be for where you are, 80% of what happens on stage when you're playing audition is completely in your brain. How are you feeling about it? Are you having a negative voice that's saying, here comes that shift, you're going to blow it? Or,
Mhm.
what am I doing out here? Or I don't deserve this. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of, I think, positive like reinforcement that I really help my clients kind of put into their playing, put into their physical aspects, so that when
Right.
we actually get there, you can rely on all parts of your body, and your brain and your, just spirit and heart are all there ready to go. Because too often, you get out on stage, you go, I know I've practiced that and I know I can play it, but why can't I play it right now? So, we deal with a
Right.
lot of very sort of self-fulfilling bad prophecies, and
Right. Yep.
I try and have people address that long before they even get out on stage. So not only are you working on increasing your technical ability, you also have to work on, increasing your mental strength and positivity so that when you do go out there, you absolutely can perform at your very best. So there's a
Mhm.
lot of different aspects that we bring together in an audition. We hope to have everything like ready to go. And that's my goal for all my clients. And whether or not you win the job, our only thing that we have control over is how we play. So
Right.
once you play on stage, whether it's great or it's awful, it's out of your hands because you don't know what the committee is thinking. You don't know who else is showing up to the audition. So there are so many other factors that you have no control over. So the only thing you want to do is just deliver at that moment, hopefully do well enough for them to continue to hear you to the next round, and maybe in the end you get the job. But I think it's
Yeah.
really important to have that kind of mindset, knowing that my only goal when I play an audition is like, I'm just going to do my very best. That's my only
Right.
job.
Do you recommend somebody comes to see you? It's like going to a doctor. You're the specialist, right? Do you recommend that they do that, a year, like I'm a college senior or I'm a graduate student and I want to
Mhm.
get into auditions. Should I come to see you a year before so you can help me coach me through, preparing to be an auditioner person? Or
Uh-huh.
should they come right before they actually have an audition scheduled?
So I recommend for anybody who is looking for an orchestral position, get a hold
Mhm.
of, what are the major excerpts and start working on them now. Because it's
Yeah.
like money in the bank, you
Right. Is
just
that
keep putting it in.
so? The earlier the better, you're saying.
Absolutely.
But is it ever too early to come and get your expertise?
No, it never
Yeah.
is. And what I
Yeah.
do is I'm in the middle of running a course right now, which is based on like the 10 most asked for excerpts on any auditions for cellos, and I'm not there might have been one person who was taking an audition during that time, but basically this is sort of like background. This is the stuff you have to know. And, if you put the time in and, you really do a deep dive on it, when you have an audition, it's like, oh yeah, I worked on that. And I remember all the things that Gloria told me I should be thinking about. And these are the sort of the pitfalls, and these are the things they want to know. This is the right style. This is the right tempo, all that sort of stuff. So you're not starting from scratch. So that's the main thing, I think, is just having a really solid feel for the basics. And also, not only do you learn those specific excerpts, you're also increasing your technical ability, because each one of them asks for very specific skills. So you may think, okay, well, I got to play this, but it's like, yeah, but in playing this, you're also learning all these other things about how to become a better cellist or a better player in general.
Yeah. I'm imagining what you're doing working with a cellist versus what I know about orchestral audition, which is not much. But the first, so you go in, I have an audition as a cellist. I've had your training. It's a blind, the first round is going to be a blind thing with some kind of screen or whatever. What are at that phase, what's the number one thing that people falter on?
So the things that we're listening to in the first round, intonation, rhythm, sometimes style, and then sound. So those are the four basics. When I'm sitting here and I've got my list, those are the four things I'm looking at. So you start playing out of tune, you're out. If you have a bad sense of pulse and you're rushing, you're out. If your sound is like, ooh, don't like that sound, and you don't have a good sense, you don't have a good control over your instrument, you're out. Sense of style, if everything else is there, maybe not, So it's very cut and dried the first round. You have to play your instrument great.
Yeah.
Right up front from the very first note, it's got to all be there. And this is why playing an audition is so tough, because you don't have time to warm up. You have to hit the ground running. You have to be ready to go, and it's got to be right there. You have in a like the first round, the preliminary round, maybe 5 or 6 minutes tops. And sometimes you don't, and before you're done, and sometimes if someone just doesn't even, make the cut, they're out in 3 minutes. So it's very tough. It's very, very tough. And you have to be prepared to go and just like hit the ground running.
So you're in that phase. So they give you, but they're just calling out to, well, I say, I'm from the jazz, so we say just calling out to tunes, but they're calling out as experts or whatever they want you to play at that point. They're just saying, play this. Right. And then after you play that, do they ever just ask you to leave, or they just like, or are they like,
thank you?
Is it there? Yes. Is it there? Okay. It is like that, right?
So I'll tell you what happens when you go to an orchestral audition, you get there, and at some point you get the list. So you have already practiced like 16 different excerpts and 2 solos or something. So you go there and they'll say maybe half an hour before, this is what you're going to be playing in the preliminary round. We're going to hear, this concerto and then these 3 excerpts or 5 excerpts. And so you go out there, so you kind of know how to prepare yourself. You play your concerto, and then they'll say, then whoever the proctor is will say, okay, go on to the excerpts, and at any point, the committee, you'll hear this disembodied voice. So thank you very much. And that's it. Sometimes if you make it through the whole list, it's like, okay, that's good. You made it through the whole list. Sometimes you make it through 3. It's like, well, I don't know. So you don't really know until everybody in your group is played. The PM comes out, personnel manager comes out and says, thank you very much. We'd like to hear number 3 and number 5 again. Or they'll say, thank you very much. The committee's decided not to pass anyone on to this round. Okay. So that's how it works.
So then round 2.
Normally it's like preliminaries, semifinals, finals. So the semifinal round will probably be the other concerto, maybe 6 or 7 excerpts, and you go through the same thing again until you get to the final round. And then usually a lot of orchestras in the final round, they'll have the music director there. Sometimes the screen comes down, sometimes it doesn't. In the LA Phil, we keep the screen up through the entire audition, especially if it's for a non-principal job. We're just listening purely based on how someone plays. We don't even see their resume sometimes. Often we don't. So that's kind of how it goes. And, obviously the level goes higher and higher because, as you whittle down the number of players, you're looking for other stuff. At that point, semifinal round, definitely the final round, we assume that you can play your instrument. What we're looking for is, does this person move me? Do they have a sense of where the phrase goes? Do they have really super clean articulation? Then the technical bar gets higher and higher. And I'd say in the very final round, because all the players who make it to the very final round are all tremendous players. They are all tremendous players. It's like, wow, how do you choose? And at that point, for me, it becomes kind of a gut thing. It's like if you have 3 players, they're all great players. I have to think to myself, who is it that I would want to sit next to for the next 30 years? Who's playing, speaks to me, and it's at such a high, very sort of refined level. And you'll often have many people on the committee who will prefer a different kind of player. But then sometimes, we just had a recent audition where everyone said, those 2 people, period, that's it, So it really kind of depends on the players, the committee, kind of the music director. It's kind of like chemistry. If the chemistry is there or it's not, or there's something that person has that I'm just hearing that, wow, they're it for me.
Yeah. I mean, it's art. I mean, let's face it. There's going to be some preference, of course.
Right.
So,
yes, that's true.
In the freelance music world, we talk about, showing up, being a nice person, all that is being a big part of it. How does that factor into this? Or does it? How does is there any kind of interview? Is there how do they know? How do you know that you talked about sitting next to them for 30 years? How do you know? No.
How do you really know? I know sometimes we said, having an interview with a psychologist should be part of the audition process.
That's what I'm getting
like, wow, how did that happen? There is no actual interview, but I think that your 2-year tenure period is for. Can this person play with everybody else? Are they a good colleague? Those are the things that kind of we take into serious consideration during the tenure review process. I think
tenure after the 2 years.
Yeah. I mean, and there's usually like a 1-year tenure review where the person is told, these are the things you need to work on, or, you're doing great, or any sort of whatever, and it's usually the section that you're sitting in has the most say as to like, how is this person actually doing? Are they fitting in? Do they meet the level and stuff like that? So if they're like personality issues that are severe enough to say this person is really not working, then at that point, they can be just sort of their contract is not renewed. They don't get tenure, and then they move on. But yeah, that's
so
it is
a
unusual.
risk, though. I mean, it's unusual. Okay, but you do have the resume. I mean, do you call in references? I mean, how does at the very end of it, or is it really just the audition? And
it's pretty much just the audition. I think how you are as a person comes up much later.
What would you? I mean, you've done this a long time. What would you change about it? What would you add or delete that you think is kind of bad or needs to be in there?
There have been a lot of issues with this idea of having so many people come, spend a ton of money, play an audition, and not get anywhere. And it's not necessarily the very best way to hire somebody. I think just because of the sheer numbers, there is no better way to do it, but we're always looking for a better way to do it. Because I think we all realize that it is incredibly expensive and it feels unfair. And do you always get the very best fit? Maybe, maybe not, and sometimes it feels a little bit like, you're just rolling the dice. I wish I had a better answer for you, but right now, this is sort of the best way we can get through a lot of people and not make it seem like we're only looking at people that we know. So I think in that sense, it's fair. Having the screen up makes it very fair. So there's no discrimination at all. You are only passed on on the virtue of your playing. So there have been, I think, excellent ways to make it more fair and make it more available to more people. But then of course, then you say, well, I can only hear you for 6 minutes because, we have 200 people waiting to play.
Right.
So, there are always pluses and minuses in any sort of audition situation. But,
you think there could be maybe a better, a different screening process, like inviting less people to come?
You can, but at the same time, we want to make it as equal as possible. So, it's not like, well, you have to go to these schools in order to be invited. There are a lot of wonderful players who don't go to like Juilliard or Manhattan or USC, who are great players. that we should hear. So, we try and be as open as possible and invite as many people as humanly possible that we can actually listen to in a fair and give everyone a fair listen.
Well, I'm glad you like the process. I mean, you don't seem disgruntled. That's great. Yeah.
You mean as an orchestral musician sitting in an orchestra for over 30
Yes.
I have to
Yeah.
say, I love my job. It is an amazing thing to sit in the middle of a symphony orchestra and be part of this incredible group of people making amazing music, affecting so many people across the world. So I feel incredibly fortunate to have the job that I do. Thank God I won it when I did. So yeah, it's a fantastic life. It may not be for everybody. It suited my personality extremely well.
No, I mean, it sounds like you've done a great job. And I want everybody to go to auditionconfidential.com, check it out. Even if you're not a cello player, one day maybe you'll have an empire of all kinds of different coaches of coaching different, that would be great.
Great idea.
I know. Yeah. The idea of getting help from different people is so vital. I think it's sometimes in music, people stay with the same teacher too long and they've kind of got out of that teacher what they can. But that teacher, just because they can teach you the cello very well, they might not know anything about how to guide you to auditions or do anything else. I'm thinking about my own past. You want to have as much input as you can, and auditions, that's the way you're going to survive in your world. And so super important. So thank you so much for your time, Gloria, and
thank you, Eric.
Have fun at your concert tonight.
Okay, we'll do.
And stay in touch. Thanks, Gloria.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself,